Welcome to today's Daily Walk in Wisdom, where we're learning all about love, the love between God and His people, between Jesus and you. Love. My. What the world needs now. That's love. In Song of Songs, chapter 2 and verse 8, the Shulamite says, "Listen to the voice of my beloved." This verse begins a new chapter or section in the song. And this section is going to continue all the way through to chapter 3 and verse 5. So in the first portion, up until verse 8 of chapter 2, the bride has been learning to deal with her deficiencies and her tendency towards self-loathing that caused her to take her eyes off of the king, and it brings her into bondage. And she starts to understand herself in light of the king's revelation. She knows now that she must identify herself with the king and his validation of her life. Don't forget now, you are the Shulamite. We need to identify ourselves with the king's validation of our lives. We might be invalids. We might invalidate ourselves. You put your ticket in a machine and it says invalid. We might invalidate ourselves, but Jesus validates us. And this is how we need to approach life. So the Shulamite's learning all about this, and this in turn deals with her horse nature and introduces her to a climate of rest. And the second section, what we're coming into now, narrates a serious decline in the bride's relationship with the king, where she becomes introverted and insensitive and even insubordinate or rebellious. So this passage, it begins with the Shulamite's first reference to the voice of the king. It's significant that in this section of the book, dealing as it is with her decline, that Jesus' voice is given such emphasis. Remember, she says, "Listen to the voice of my beloved." And so there is a great emphasis in this section on the voice of the king. So her decline is in direct disobedience to his voice. Remember, in the Garden of Eden, Eve disobeyed the word of God. The Greek preposition for the word under is hupo. And the Greek word for to hear or understand is the word akuo. Together they form the word hupakuo, to hear under, hupakuo, to hear under, which is translated in our word today as obedience. To hear under is obedience. So God gave a word in the Garden of Eden and expected Adam and Eve to be obedient. So there's another Greek word. The Greek word is para, which means beside, and it can even mean beside with a view to being against or opposing. And so if you put the word para with akuo being to hear, then you get parakuo. Now that is the Greek word for disobedience. Disobedience. One of the words for our enemy, the devil, is the word dis. Dis. The god of dis, D-I-S, dis. So disobedience. Now disobedience is simply when you are under God. Disobedience comes when you are under God and you hear God speak a word and you don't want to obey. And your response is to say, I'm hearing you, but I don't like what I hear, and I'm not going to submit and obey. I'm like a little 2-year-old, and I don't like what I'm hearing, and so I'm just going to have a little temper tantrum here because I don't want to do what you're asking me to do. Now, this automatically takes you out from being under God and brings you up alongside and against or opposing God. So obedience puts you under the protection or the covering and the instruction of God. Disobedience takes you away from that and puts you alongside God, where you make a god of yourself. And you take a stand against God. Now remember, God said to Adam, or said about Adam, I should say, that he has become like us, knowing good and evil. That was Adam making himself into a god. Now, the word of God is a love word, but it is a directive word. It tells you what to do. It tells you how to live. It tells you how to live within yourself. It tells you how to live relationally. It tells you how to live in connection with the animal world and how to live in the elemental world. It tells you how to live. It tells you how to live in relation to God. It tells you how to live in relation to angels and how to live in relation to Satan and to demons. It just tells you how to live. Now, not only is it a directive word, but it is also a protective word. As long as you're listening to God, you are safe. But the moment you stop hearing God, that's when you're in trouble. Now, the world around us at this present time is one vast illustration of what happens when man follows their own counsel, aided and abetted by Satan's support. And the result is a breakdown in the economy, and a breakdown in health, and a breakdown in education, and a breakdown in every department, a breakdown in the climate, and everything breaks down. Because when you forsake the instruction of God, you forsake the place of safety and enter a vast, squalid arena of self-abuse and self-destruction and spending and greed and materialism to the point of moral and spiritual bankruptcy. This is why we need to bring ourselves back to the Word. Listen to the voice of my beloved. It's a love word. Being under the Word not only directs us positively the way that we should go, but in directing us positively, it is protecting us from the destruction of doing your own thing. That's never really doing your own thing. There's always a satanic element attached to it. You think you're doing your own thing, but you're always being helped. Satan is all for you doing your own thing, because if you are doing your own thing, then you're not doing God's thing. You don't have to be a Satanist to be in Satan's kingdom. All you got to do is refuse to do God's thing. Do your own thing. Do your own thing. That's a saying that we heard, well, I've heard it since I was born. Do your own thing. And if you're doing your own thing, you've been allured by the devil, and you're doing his thing. So in this relational obedience of being under God, I'm listening to a word that is going to protect, and it's also a word that's going to provide. God said, you may eat of every tree in the garden. That's the provision of God. But it's also a word that limits or prohibits. It says, but there is one tree you're not allowed to eat of. It's like having a boundary or having banks in a river. If you didn't have a prohibition to the water, then instead of having a river, you'd end up with a boggy marsh. And so the Word of God provides, but it also prohibits, so that there can be a river that flows through my life and that my life doesn't just become a boggy marsh. There were many trees in the garden, but only one that you couldn't eat from. That's a ratio. 100 to 1. That's if there were 100 trees there, or maybe 1,000 to 1, or maybe 10,000 to 1, or maybe 1,000,000 to 1. That's the ratio. And so the provision is far greater, always far greater, than the prohibition. But the prohibition has to be there to test your willingness to stay under the Word. That's why the Shulamite proclaims, "Listen to the voice of my beloved." Or we could say it like this: listen to the voice of love. Whenever God tells you something, listen to the voice of love. And that is our word of wisdom concerning love for our lives today. Remember, wisdom is the answer to everything. God bless you. We'll see you soon for more out of this marvelous book.